If you've seen the most recent Borat film, then you're quite familiar with how much of a fool Rudolph Giuliani's made himself in recent times. And if you haven't, I highly recommend it because it has a good glimpse at seeing exactly what the Republican Party and a lot of conservatives are up to these days. And especially with Giuliani, he gets his hand kind of cut down the cookie jar. That said, I kind of want to follow some of the pattern of how he's been a fool in the political spectrum as of late. Like, he's really taken the dive down the Trump rabbit hole, and he's really been a sycophantic supporter of Trump in recent times. And most recently now, he's Trump's lawyer trying to help stop the ballots, right? The mail-in voting ballots that are being questioned by the Republican Party. So let's take a look at his speech, at what he said, and see if we can kind of debunk or figure out what he's getting at with a lot of this stuff.
It is very, very sad that we're here in the city that's really the birthplace of our democracy. And this is among one of the most anti-democratic things I've ever seen or encountered.
Okay, that's really funny coming from him. He must not remember being the mayor of New York City, where he was touted as being one of the most authoritarian mayors that New York City ever had. He was in favor of a lot of the policies that the police used in terms of police brutality. He was very strict in a lot of ways, tough on crime. And yeah, so for him to make a comment like that, wow, he must really forget his roots.
And it's not just here in Philadelphia. This is going on all over the country. We have filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit actually required that when these mail-in ballots that are highly suspicious anyway, this form of balloting has always been considered the most prone to fraud.
Okay, that's not true. That is a complete lie, and he's being completely disingenuous here. The only reason that he's calling this particular batch of votes invalid is because they're coming from the Democrats. And because they know that with the Democrats having voted largely through mail because of COVID, and because we actually get it, Democrats have believed that COVID actually exists, and people on the left have believed that COVID actually exists, people in those categories have voted through the mail, as opposed to the Republicans who largely voted in person. The fact is, these types of mail-in votes have been done all the time. Active military, if they're living on a base in another state, or if they're living overseas, has their democratic right to a vote recognized through mail-in voting. Generally, wealthier people, when they travel to other states, either in a second home or other situations, like Trump himself has done in the past, will use these votes in order to maintain their democratic, right to vote in the election. So this is done all the time. And they're only concerned because it's going to favor the Democrats right now. Also, I love this screenshot of his face right here. This is absolute gold right here. But anyway, yeah, so they're just trying to undercut the democratic process in this case. And I mean democratic not as in the party, but the actual process of counting the votes that we're supposed to be looking at. All of those votes are legitimate, and for him to call that into question is completely disingenuous because he himself has probably used this system. If not, Trump has.
That's according to the New York Times when it didn't apply to candidate President Trump. Well, we were supposed to be allowed by law to observe the counting of the ballots.
Are you implying that you can't? Because as far as I understood it, they allowed a certain number of Democratic and Republican lawyers or some form of poll watchers into these institutions to allow the things to be monitored and observed. If you're implying that they're not, I don't know, because that's the way it's supposed to be.
Now, observe means, to any intelligent person, being able to look at it. The way it's interpreted by the Democrat crooked machine of Philadelphia is that the observers can be 20 or 30 feet away.
Yeah, that's done to protect the rights of the average citizen. If you have everybody reading the address and name and can associate that information with who a person voted for, that can be really compromising to certain people's safety and their privacy. So why would you want people actively looking at and overstepping their bounds and looking at a person's private vote? All you need is enough people in the room to make sure that the votes are being brought in properly, that the votes are being observed properly, and that they're being input into whatever database they have properly. You don't need every person just examining every single vote and being like, this person voted for this. That would be highly illegal. There's a reason that you have that distance in that particular state. And I'm sure each state has their own guidelines and procedures with that. And again, they have Republicans in that office. Like, they have people there on the, actual lawyers or poll watchers that are specifically selected and approved to go into these places. The fact that they're saying that there's nobody watching is just rallying fear and trying to create a narrative of a fraudulent election that's just not true.
Never able to see the ballot itself. Never able to see if it was properly postmarked, properly addressed, properly signed on the outside. All the things that...
The fact that they're worried about it being postmarked properly is kind of funny, given that this is the same party who tried to diminish and destroy the USPS's ability to properly carry these mail-in ballots. It just seems extremely, extremely disingenuous and problematic. The Trump administration tried to make it a lot harder for the USPS to do its job, and he's now worried about postmarks and signatures and little details like that. And, part of the thing that happened is that I believe it was Michigan, where they tried to enact a law that would allow them to count ballots earlier. And the Republicans stopped it, even though the same type of law exists in Ohio. And now that the votes are being counted later, they're trying to say that they're fake votes or they arrived late, when most of the votes should have been able to be counted even before Election Day. So what it really boils down to, as long as you have a vote that came in, that was sent in the mail and postmarked on Election Day, and has arrived within the window prescribed by a specific state, which I believe in Philadelphia is 3 days, something like that, that vote is legitimate, and it should be counted. And for him to say otherwise is just another attempt by the Republican Party right now to try to perform a coup and to maintain power.
That often lead to disqualification of ballots, or make it very easy to dump 50,000 totally fraudulent ballots because they're not observed.
First of all, it's observed. Second of all, where's your proof that these 50,000 ballots or whatever are coming from somewhere? Where's your evidence? The burden of proof is completely on you guys. This is just fear-mongering. There's no proof, because it doesn't exist. This is not happening.
This went on for 20 hours. While all of you thought there was some kind of legitimate count going on here in Philadelphia, it was totally illegitimate. So we went back to court, and we went before a Democrat judge. No need to tell you what the result in Philadelphia is if you're before a Democrat judge.
It's funny to me that they are calling about the partisanship of the judicial branch, right? Like, especially with as many federal judges as Trump has appointed via the Republican Party, right? Like, there are so many Republican federal judges now. They just took over the Supreme Court with a majority of 6-3 with Amy Coney Barrett's nomination. And they've basically just created this situation where anything reaching the Supreme Court is going to probably lean in a conservative direction. So they have no issue stacking the courts in a partisan favor. And furthermore, there was a case where they tried to throw out some of the votes in, I believe, in Texas, and a largely Republican circuit ended up throwing the case out. It's not an issue of partisanship with these votes. It's an issue of the fact that These votes are legitimate and these cases have no merit or standing, and they should not be taken seriously. And the fact that they are is scary.
Obviously a political hack who doesn't know the meaning of the word observe. Observe means to be able to look. Not a single Republican has been able to look at any one of these mail ballots. They could be from Mars as far as we're concerned.
Just like all the people that you're sending out to these places to count the votes, right? Like, just like all these people who are the conspiratorial QAnon types that are being sent out there, right? They could just be from anywhere. They could be from Mars, right? And we're supposed to just let them into the office while they're committing violence and, threatening violence, rather. Some of them, I'm sure, want to commit violence. They're threatening violence. And to the point where some of these places have had to put up barricades, and it's slowing the process down even further, which I think is part of the goal, right? Like, you're trying to make this look as illegitimate as possible, when in reality, it is a completely legitimate process.
Or they could be from the Democratic National Committee. Joe Biden could have voted 50 times, as far as we know, or 5,000 times.
This would be hilarious if it wasn't so scary. Biden could, throw out 50 votes. And, it almost is frightening because they talk about all these extra votes. It's like, did they stack this thing? Did they do this kind of thing? Do they want to do this kind of thing? Have they, because they've taken some serious steps in terms of processing this conspiracy. It's something that I wouldn't put past the Republican Party to do more than the Democrats. Not that the Democrats are like great or anything, but this is just a level of conspiracy that has no proof, no evidence, and it's just, this is what this party has become now. It's the party of conspiracy theories.
Ballots could be from Camden. Philadelphia, unfortunately, and I would say this about my own city, has a reputation for voter fraud. You have a reputation for dead people voting, and we're going to go look at just how many dead people voted here.
Hold on, I'm going to look that one up, because I do not believe there are any threats of dead people voting. Let's see, dead people voting in elections. Let's take a look, shall we? Here we go. Stanford University Institute for Economic Research. Dead people don't vote. Study points to an extremely rare fraud. Let's see who this is. With concerns rising over a potentially contested presidential election next week, a new study by Stanford researchers suggests that worries over one type of election day fraud are overblown. Ballots cast in the name of dead people. No. This is done in Washington State. We're talking about 0.0003% of all voters over an 8-year period. Do you know how low that is? This is done by Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research Senior Fellow, Andrew Hall, okay? So, Hall says the findings, though specific to one state, have potentially broader implications. As states expand vote by mail during the pandemic, many people have raised concerns that mail-in ballots are sent to dead people, stolen and counted in elections. We find that this type of fraud is likely to be extremely rare in states that take basic precautions. So unless he's implying that all of the states that just happen to be voting for Biden now with all these mail-in votes happen to be the states that have not taken proper precautions, which seems kind of fraudulent, but not in a state like Arizona that's largely leaning Democrat now. Keep counting the votes there. So there's no fraud going on there. Why would there be any fraud going on, in a place where they might win if they keep counting the votes? Only in the places where they have a lead and are afraid of losing it from the mail-in votes. That's where we should, check these votes because they're fraudulent. There's a lot of double standard going on. And as this is shown, there's no evidence that there's dead people voting. And further, I think I remember there being a case where there was a person in the hospital that, let's see if I can find that. That basically they voted and then they died while in the hospital, and basically they had the vote thrown out because they passed away, which would kind of even more show this. So let me see if I can find that. Hospital. Here we go. CNN, right? Take a look at this. A 20-year-old woman cast her ballot early before dying of cancer. Her state will now throw it out. And I could go through this. I don't think there's a point. She had bone cancer. She had a bone marrow transplant. It was her first ballot. She sent it in, and she died. And so now her state is, which is Wisconsin, is throwing it out and taking care of it. This is what's happening. This isn't fraudulent. And I don't know what else to say. This is just not a thing that happens. The statistical value of the number of times this is happening is not enough to cause any serious or actual reputable damage to the integrity of any election. So, this is just them trying to delegitimize everything. So, let's take a look back at Giuliani.
I didn't think we'd have to do that, but we will. And you'll have a reputation for people being bussed in from Camden voting here.
What has he got against Camden?
That happened. But this goes way beyond any of that. And let me also add that this isn't happening just here. We have exactly the same lawsuit in Wisconsin, where exactly the same thing happened. Except in Wisconsin, mysteriously at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, about 120,000 ballots appeared. Whoa.
So the mail-in votes arrived? Is that what you're telling me? The mail-in ballots just arrived at the place they were supposed to go to.
Oh, here come these ballots. Well, we have no idea if they really are ballots. We have no idea if they're signed, if they're postmarked properly.
Wasn't there an incident that happened where they had all these like photos or something, and a bunch of people came out and found out that they were bringing in like press equipment? Like, if they're bringing things in packages, it could be like equipment, it could be food, it could be anything. Like, I wonder how much of it is them just being kind of, conspiratorial, which we're seeing quite a lot lately, or how much of it is just like, maybe they were actually ballots being brought in and they're just the voting, like the actual ballots being brought to the facility. You bring it in overnight so that you can count them in the morning so that you can get the job done. Again, if they were allowed to do it in, say, Michigan and Wisconsin beforehand, then we wouldn't be having this issue.
If it isn't just the same person who submitted 100,000 ballots and they all got counted.
Again, where's the proof?
This is the way they intend to win. Now I'm informed by former Congressman Sweeney, who's been going around the country and collecting this information, that similar situation in Arizona, similar situation in Nevada, and a similar situation, what am I missing, John? Where are you? In Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan. Again, let me be specific what it is. This whole new thing that never happened before in our country, these mail-in ballots.
This whole brand new thing that's just never happened before in our country. Mail-in ballots, this thing that everybody does all the time, that historically has been done since the beginning of the country, when we had to have ballots sent from rural areas into state capitals, usually by horse, back when the colonial period. These mail-in ballots that used to take weeks to process to figure out who the president was. Never happened before in our country's history, ever. We've never had mail-in ballots. I am getting great pauses on him.
Which has been a cause of real concern for everyone because they can easily be fraudulent. Well, one of the things that the law attaches to that is the right for both parties to observe the ballot, the way we do with absentee ballots.
Hold on. That distinction he made just there between mail-in ballots and absentee ballots is very scary, right? Because there is no difference between a mail-in ballot and an absentee ballot. That distinction is what they're doing in order to undermine this process. That is something to look out for if you ever hear it from one of these Republican politicians. There is no difference. When I got my mail-in ballot, it said absentee, active military. It's the same ballot that military uses. And I don't know how it is in other states, but at the end of the day, most states are probably using the exact same ballot that they would use for someone who's out of state, someone who's sick, someone who's in active military. There's no difference between an absentee and mail-in ballot, and the fact that they are trying to create this difference is, again, part of this coup process to maintain power and bring us into, another 4 years of Trump.
You make certain it's properly signed. On the outside, there's a signature. You make sure that it's properly postmarked.
I'm sure you've checked, and since you're so hurt about signatures, right? I am sure you've checked the signature of every ID from every, person that you've ever been with intimately, right? You wouldn't have had any interest in anybody underage, right? No? No, not at all? You've always checked, right? Always checking those signatures, always making sure everything's legit and valid. You've always been on top of that, right? Okay.
You make sure that it's properly addressed, and then you pass on it. A number of these are often challenged by the Democrat representative or the Republican representative.
So he's admitting that there's a Republican representative there. Right? There's a Republican representative. If he's implying that there isn't, then, I don't know, because as far as I'm aware, there is.
We never got a chance to look at a single one of them. The gentleman here who did this for us says about 100,000 ballots went through that process in the 20-plus hours in which they wasted his time by not allowing him to see a single ballot.
Where's your proof?
Well, that's 120,000 ballots that should just be taken out of the count.
Oh, there we go. There's fascism showing its colors right there. Let's just remove all the votes. Just get rid of it. Just throw out all the votes. We don't need democracy. Democracy is an illusion. I mean, not that we live in a democracy truly, we live in a representative democracy, republic, whatever you want to call it. But this is truly fascism trying to fascism right here. This is democracy being thrown right out the window.
So you want to look at that number, that 120,000 should come out. And this is an area in which Biden is getting 60, 70% of the vote.
And that's why you want to throw it out. Yeah, it's probably a largely Democrat-leaning area. It's probably a city. It's, Philadelphia, right? It's a city. It's largely Democrat-leaning. That's what happens in cities. This isn't a surprise. This is just the red Mirage blowing away. Everybody's been talking about this for months, at least for weeks, describing how when the election happens, all the people that vote in person are going to be largely Trump supporters because they don't believe COVID exists, or they don't care that COVID exists, and Trump said to vote in person. Biden and the Democrats have called for people to vote in by mail, and anybody who has a sensible understanding of the coronavirus has made every effort to probably vote in by mail. That's not surprising that most of these ballots are for Biden. And the fact that you know that, and you're willingly wanting to throw those out because of false accusations of their illegitimacy is nothing more than a fascist way to undermine this election and perform a coup. Sorry, but that's exactly what it is.
I don't know if this is going on any other place, but it is going on in enough frequency in Wisconsin that we've brought suit, and now we'll have to look into 3 other places. What it says to me is
he doesn't even know the names of which places they are. He's just saying, 3 more places, 3 more places. And the fact of the matter is, he doesn't know if it's happening in other places, but it's conveniently happening in the places that will slide Trump right into victory, right? Like, it's not happening in the places where the Republicans could lose something. It's just in the places where the Democrats are. And the Democrats are the only ones causing fraud, not the Republicans at all.
This is a concerted effort of the crooks that run the Democrat Party. And you know these big city machines are crooked.
Oh, I'm sure you know quite well about crooked big city machines, right? Right, Giuliani? You know, when you ran New York, you know, when you were basically the tough on crime leader, when you allowed for all of the police brutality and everything else that you allowed to happen. Oh, yeah, you know really well about corruption.
You know that. 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years of one-party rule leads to corruption of all kinds. Voter fraud is one of the biggest because that's how you keep your power. But we're not going to let them get away with it. They're not going to steal this election. This election gets decided by the people. These people, the elite, they don't care about the people. The people.
I think he just used the elite card, people. I think he just used the elite card.
People are the deplorables, the chumps. They're not important. To President Trump, he's the whole reason that he ran for office.
Oh, President Trump. I'm going to just be your sycophant and follow through on everything that you say with your great sacrifice. I know you had to leave your businesses and finances for 4 years while using your White House position to guarantee more financial gain without giving up anything. Your family was employed and financially backed by the White House. You've had entirely given up so much for the people. And these deplorables that he's talking about, which deplorables are you talking about? Are you talking about the people who, are just kind of a tad racist? And because I kind of call that deplorable, being racist. Are you talking about the people that he left out in the cold and didn't care about? Because I'm sure they're just being toughened up with the strong fascist tendencies. They're being made strong by God Emperor Trump, right? That's all that it is. He doesn't care about people. These people don't care about people. They care about protecting people with money and status, and they're pretending that they have even a semblance of caring about regular, everyday people.
And he's the whole reason for which he's carrying on this campaign, so that your vote can mean something.
So that the rich people can have their vote mean more by having the entire election process undermined, and largely poor people, probably a large amount of people of color, get their vote tossed to the side. Okay, yeah. Which people are you supporting there, Giuliani? Which people are you and Trump supporting? Why don't you make that clear? Because he's not talking about the majority of Americans, because the majority of Americans seem to be voting for Biden.
Your vote doesn't get wiped out by 100,000 fraudulent, meaningless paper ballots that no one gets to observe. So we are going to continue the lawsuit here. We're going to bring a second one, and then we're going to bring a federal lawsuit.
There we go. We're going to bring a federal lawsuit. We're going to take it up to those Republican judges. We might even bring it up to the Supreme Court, right? You got to pay attention to stuff like that. They want to bring it up to the Supreme Court because if they get it in the Supreme Court that they just stack 6-3 in the conservative direction, they're going to make it so that they can delegitimize this entire election. This is fascism being fascism, and it's a coup at work. These votes need to be counted. They cannot be undermined.
And we're going to take a very good look at whether we bring this nationally. We certainly are going to bring it here and in Wisconsin. Quite possibly we'll do a national lawsuit and really expose the corruption of the Democrat Party. But this is beyond anything I've ever seen before. This comes when you think you have so much power and you own the media that you can do anything you want.
And Giuliani certainly knows everything about doing what you want because the police under his administration in New York City were allowed to do everything that we want. Let's not forget about Amadou Diallo, right? Let's not forget about the fact that police officers in New York City were backed by him with racially profiling people, with planting drugs, with committing crimes, and let's go back to that idea, right? Like the fact that nobody's observing, right? But we believe police officers, right? We believed when these police officers went to court and trial, their word was enough to defend themselves. Giuliani backed them up, right? That's what he did as mayor. Their word was enough. So why do we need such supervision of these quote unquote fraudulent, people counting the votes? This is just utterly ridiculous. He maintained power and authority in a very specific way. There was murder committed under his authority and his administration, and we trusted the words of the police officers. We can't trust people who are just counting votes. We can't trust that 100,000 votes are just not appearing out of anywhere. They have databases for this stuff. This is just attempts to delegitimize things, and Giuliani saying this makes him look like the biggest hypocrite in the world and such a fool, because he's been in places where he's had to defend worse corruption than this.
Well, sorry. We're going to fight for the people. We're going to vindicate their right.
Which people are you fighting for, Giuliani? Which people?
President Trump has won Pennsylvania. I've never heard of a count where you're ahead by 400,000 with 80+% counted, and they haven't called it for you yet.
How about a situation where there's more than 400,000 votes left on the table? In a largely Democrat area, the votes coming in from, and maybe 400,000 votes just aren't enough.
They called California the moment the polls closed. How many votes do you have to be ahead?
Enough to win.
To win, for a Republican to win here, how many votes do we have to be ahead?
Enough that you have more at the end of the polling, at the end of the collection of all the votes, when they're counted. If you have more votes, you win.
400,000 is not enough?
Nope.
With 80+% counted, I think there's only 14% of the vote to go. Do you think we're stupid? You think we're fools?
Yes, actually, yes I do, especially you. And you've made yourself more of one in this video than is possible. Unfortunately, people are listening to your foolish rhetoric, and that's the scary part right now.
You know something? The Democrats do think you're stupid, and they do think you're fools, and that's why you get called deplorable.
No. The fact that people are stupid, as he's saying, is not why I think these people are deplorable. I think that some of the people a good chunk of the people who voted for Trump are deplorable because they're racist, because they tend to promote very fascist policies, because they're the ones who are believing in all the conspiracy theories that you're throwing out. I think that they are generally fearful and scared, and I think you're pushing that even further. And at the end of the day, they're deplorable because of their actions and choices, not because of something innately wrong with them.
Trump's. It's over. We're going to stick with this. We're going to win this election. We've actually won it. Just a matter of counting the votes fairly.
They've already won it. It's just a matter of counting the votes fairly. You know what that means, right? At the end of the day, right? Counting fairly means they get to keep their votes. Counting fairly means they get to have the states they're winning. And that all of the votes that are for Democrats are just going to be tossed aside. Because they've already won. There's no sense of them being legitimate here. This is an active attempt at a coup. Giuliani is using the legal judicial process to undermine democracy in this country, and it needs to be stopped. And hopefully, they do not get their way. Because the type of fascism that Trump is going to bring about if he wins and gets to continue and consolidate his power is going to be devastating for this country. Biden might have issues. We can fight with that later. But Trump right now is a much bigger threat. And that said, I'm Anarchistara, and I hope you enjoyed watching.